Hey guys, it's Sam and this is my spoiler-free review of The Magician King by Lev Grossman. This is the second book in the Magician's trilogy. I will leave my full spoiler-free review for the first book on the screen. This is an adult fantasy novel and there is a trigger warning for sexual assault in this book. So I enjoyed the reading of this book immensely more than I enjoyed the first book. The first book I enjoyed after reading it and being able to discuss it with people, but as I was reading it I didn't enjoy it. This book I actually enjoyed a ton more. First off, we talk about the world building. We get to see a ton more places within this magical world, and I really enjoyed that. There is a lot of elements of kind of jumping between worlds, which is just a theme that I tend to enjoy a lot. And we get to see how everything is built, and again, with this series, Lev Grossman messes with your expectations and knows that you're coming to it with all these expectations of all these other series, and he even references a lot of these series, which I mentioned in my first review, and he makes sure that he's pinging you to different things. So even though you know by the second book that like things aren't going to be as they seem, like you still expect certain things, and just seeing how he builds this world that we expect but is both like more sinister and twisted than what we know from other fantasy books, I think is really cool. Next, I'm going to talk about the characters. Again, I even enjoyed the characters a lot more in this book. There are a lot of the same characters, but they are just better to me for some reason. Again, they've gone through a lot even in the first book, and they go through a lot in this book. So they are developing constantly. The character development is so good, but at the same time, you still see the same kind of characters that they were at the beginning, and they still remain true to themselves and who they've been the entire time. And I think by the second book, you're a little more used to them. These characters are extremely realistic and they're very flawed, normal human beings. And the things that happen to them and the decisions they make are things that you know would happen if magic was real. Like, obviously, not everyone, most people are not going to be like Harry Potter and all of his friends or all the people in Lord of the Rings. And they're not going to be like stalwart and true. Like, most people are going to make really dumb, flawed decisions. And that is what these characters do. And they're so realistic that in this book I was definitely pulling for them a lot more. The main character of Quentin still isn't my favorite, but I liked him a lot more and I did pull for him. Like, I did feel for the things that he was going through. And there's another character that is introduced that I enjoy a lot, and you learn a lot about their backstory, and I was pulling for them the entire time, and all the things that they went through are just so interesting. So these characters I feel a lot more of a connection to, and it's really building up to the last book, where I know a lot of like probably horrible things are gonna happen, and I'm a lot more connected to them and invested in them than I was in the first book. But the first book does provide like a good foundation for like knowing their behaviors, and these things, like, they learn from things, but at the same time they don't, and that is very real to me. Lastly, I want to talk about the plot. The pacing in this book is a lot better than the first book. The first book dragged a lot in different parts, and this book I felt like all the way through I had a desire to pick it up and keep reading it, and things were constantly happening, and that was really fun. Again, it wasn't all necessarily action, but the things that are happening are really interesting, and we do get to kind of split between two perspectives. We do get Quentin of what's going on with him, but then we get this other character and their backstory, and both of them were equally interesting. So at one point I was liking the other character a little bit more, but then as the story progressed, I found myself like not wanting to jump out of either story. Like, I was like, oh, I want to get back to that because like what's happening every time at the end of each chapter. So I did enjoy that a lot more. And again, even though the first book was so hard for me to get through at times, it did provide a good foundation for a lot of things that are going on here and a lot of connections that are being made with the story, because this story is definitely woven together really well. And I said in my first review that I could tell there were going to be things that were going to be referenced from the first book, and that everything's going to be tied together and just complete. And I can tell again from this book, even in this book there were things that were kind of tied back, but not everything has been tied up, obviously, because there's one more book. So it's going to be really great to have the whole series tied up in this last book. And I think that the pacing is going to continue to be really good, and the ending with this, again, like I said, the expectations that you have, like you try to not have expectations for this series. You try. But especially if you're a fantasy person, you are going to have expectations no matter what, and they're constantly blown away. And like, even though you're prepared, you're like, okay, something's gonna happen, and like, it's not gonna be what I think, like, you still have this in your head where you're like, did that just happen? Like, all the time. So I really, really loved this book, and I cannot wait for the last book in the series. I gave The Magician King 4 out of 5 stars. I am going to be doing a spoilery gush on this book, and I will link that on the screen. So if you are not aware, Kayla of Bookadoodles and I are doing a read-along for this entire series. This was the book for July, and then August we're going to be reading the very last book, which is The Magician's Land. So if you guys want to join us, we have a Goodreads group, which I will link down below, and we do talk on Twitter in the hashtag Magician16, and sometime in September we're going to be doing a full live show discussion on everything. So I am going to be doing that little discussion myself, talking about it, but It's going to be very small because we're going to be talking about the most of the stuff with this whole series in the live show in September. So comment down below, let me know what you thought of The Magician King. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see all of you guys soon. Bye!